What is your kidney function? What is your liver function? Because this is going to be like baseline normal stuff. And then on top of that, you layer longevity, right? And unfortunately, there are a lot of things that I would love to measure that we can't measure yet. How a scoring system would necessarily change their dynamic.
The body runs in a similar way to a business in that things need to happen at the right time in the right sequence so that it performs at the best possible level. As an example, if I want someone to go and run, exercise, improve their cardiovascular fitness, they need to improve their VO2 max. If someone's weak and they're not very strong, they need to improve their grip strength.
You mentioned grip strength. Well, that's great because I'm a rock climber.
And this show is for founders, owners, and executives, and obviously high-performing operators who want to understand three things. Where am I now? Where am I heading? And how many years of optimal life can I reclaim? But there's a second part to that, and it's not enough to just reclaim years. We need to measure those years as accurately as possible, because if the number does not reflect your real biology, it does not help you make better decisions. That's why the BioAge Index exists. We are building a unified biological age score that brings together three layers: functional age, how well your body performs; physical age, how your structure, metabolism, strength, and body composition are aging; and obviously cellular age, what is happening underneath at the biological and molecular level. The mission is to reclaim as many years of optimal life as possible, as accurately as possible. We are constantly asking, what are we measuring? How accurate is it? What is missing? And how do we make the signal better? Because the purpose is simple: to live better longer. That means more energy, less drag, sharper thinking, better recovery, stronger relationships, and a body that supports the life you are trying to build. The mechanism that we use is timing. Your body runs on rhythms, sequence, and structure. What you do matters, but when you do it matters even more. Hello, and welcome to your next episode of the BioAge Index. My name's Grant Hutchby. I'm your host. Today's conversation I'm really excited about because it's one of the most important layers of the biological age: cellular aging. Because most people treat low energy, poor sleep, slower recovery, fat gain, and inconsistency as separate problems, but they may all be symptoms of the same thing. The systems inside the cell are starting to fail. Today, I'm joined by Sandra. Sandra is a physician, cellular biologist, longevity expert, and the creator of the Kaufmann Protocol. Her work breaks down aging into specific cellular mechanisms, which is exactly the type of thinking we care about on this show. So it's not vague aging, not guesswork, not take this because someone on a podcast said so, but more a structured way as to why this person is aging, which systems are creating the drag, what can we do about it, and how accurately can we measure the change. Sandra, welcome to the BioAge Index. Before we get into the science and all of the questions that I've got for you, I want to start with the question that I'm asking every single guest that comes on this show. What does longevity mean to you?
So I want to first start out by saying that was a beautiful preamble. I was mesmerized, and I'm thinking, God, your audience must love that, because I just absolutely was enthralled with that. Longevity to me is the understanding that there's a significant difference between lifespan and health span. And this has sort of evolved over time, because I used to say, oh, I'm into longevity. And people would say, I really just don't want to be that old. Because that's the idea that if you're 100, you're going to be sitting in a wheelchair in an old folks home, sort of drooling and demented, right? But so health span is the idea that you can be as avidly active, interesting, doing whatever it is that you want to do as long as humanly possible. And I think that's what your audience is interested in. No one wants to be old and decrepit. What we want to be is up in our years, maintaining our wisdom, our intellect, our knowledge, our vitality as long as possible. And if I happen to fall off a cliff when I'm 110, I'm okay with that. I don't want to live forever. I just want to live as well as possible, as long as possible.
Yeah. So it's really interesting that you say that, because I've come across that with people as well, where they said, oh, I don't want to live to 150. And what I say, well, imagine you were 150 now. Would you want to die tomorrow? No, because you look, you feel in a certain way. And if you're vital, if you're loving life and going through life in the best way possible, why would you want to die irrelevant of what age you are?
Yeah, that is exactly why we do what we do right there.
Excellent. Cool. So I'm going to start off with one of the key things that I'm focusing on at the moment, which is accuracy. And when we talk about measuring biological age accurately, what do you think most people get wrong?
Everything.
Okay.
Is that a great place to start?
Yeah, great. Let's talk about it.
So what I find truly, truly interesting is people are doing fantastic work in exactly answering that question. But what I have found is that people live in silos.
Okay.
And people have their own very self-serving ways of looking at the world. And what I mean by that is when I got into longevity, it was like 15 years ago, there was no anti-aging. There was no longevity medicine. It was absolute curiosity. If you opened a magazine, longevity was, take some fish oil, whatever. It's like the worst advice ever. And I'm not saying that particular thing is bad, but like there was no clear understanding of why we aged or why cells age. And this has been sort of my life's work here now for a while. But people live in silos. So there were the people, the epigenetics people, there are the telomere people, there's the glycation age people. There's everyone that they what their research has been based on. They're obsessed with it. They make their protocols designed around it. And so they think that their little piece of the puzzle is the absolute most important piece. And I'm not saying pieces aren't important. It's like, but life is a puzzle. And if you don't have all of the pieces, it's just not going to work out well, right?
Exactly.
And so, but it's really interesting. I know these people, they're obsessed with their telomere length. They really think that that's the history, or like that is it, the end all be all of life. What is my telomere length? And when I ask, well, maybe the telomere length in your kidney is different than that in your liver versus your brain versus your white cell count, because different organs have different physiologic stresses, then they just clam up. And they're like, but this is my telomere length. I'm like, I don't necessarily think that's true. Is there one measurement that fits everything? No, there isn't. It's going to be and this is a terrible non-specific word, but a mishmash, if you will, of different measurements in different cellular categories to figure out sort of like how physiologically old you really are. But it begs the question, does it matter? I mean, everyone celebrates our birthdays. Fantastic, right? It's very cultural. Some cultures don't even do that. Does it matter how physiologically old you are? Because you're not going to go, oh my God, I'm doing so well, I'm going to cut back on my therapies. I don't think it works that way. I think people that have fallen into the great abyss of longevity will do everything and anything they can possibly do, regardless of what the numbers are reflecting. Like, I don't measure my own longevity markers anymore. I've just decided to go like full bore. Whatever happens is going to happen.
Okay, interesting. It's a good way of looking at it. I mean, if you were to say what would be a good way, if you wanted to understand how fast your cells are aging, if you were to do a test, what tests would you do? Would you do multiple tests? So what I'm doing with BioAge index as an example is I'm taking like your VO2 max, your grip strength, your blood pressure, your resting heart rate, your HRV, your body fat, visceral fat, all those different markers, as well as cellular aging, and I'm looking at epigenetic tests at the moment. If I was to layer anything else in with that, what would you suggest would make that more accurate in terms of a biological age score, as an example?
I think that, one thing you have to think about too is, are you measuring things on or off meds? So as an example,
okay,
I don't have high blood pressure, but I take high blood pressure medication. So if you were to measure my blood pressure, you'd say, wow, you're unusually low. Is that good or bad, right? Is that accurate? Is it not accurate? It's kind of hard to say, right? You mentioned grip strength. Well, that's great because I'm a rock climber. It's, the numbers are going to be a little bit swayed. So again, it's going to be a mishmash of things. But I think that from a physician point of view, you also start out with baseline, right? What is your lipid panel? What is your kidney function? What is your liver function? Because this is going to be like baseline normal stuff. And then on top of that, you layer longevity, right? And unfortunately, there are a lot of things that I would love to measure that we can't measure yet. So there's one company, Ginfinity, that measures NAD, but honestly, I don't really think it's accurate yet. Like, they're good people. I think it's a great study. However, like, it's just not accurate yet. But
yeah, what I've heard
NAD
about NAD is you can detect whether it's in the blood, but not whether it's actually being used, right?
That is correct.
Is that the right? Okay.
And the other interesting thing is that, so NAD levels, they're circadian. So they're going to peak mid-afternoon, right? Okay. So I went to a big lecture and I was talking about NAD, and I asked, hundreds of people in this audience, I'm like, who here knows what time they tested their NAD level? I'm like, no one knows. Like, so if you don't know what time you're testing something on a circadian level, how accurate is that result, even if it's extracellular versus intracellular, right? So there's lots of specifics that we kind of need to know. It would also be like amazing to know what our sirtuin levels were. Sirtuins
Oh
start
yeah.
dropping by the time you're 35, the rest of them by the time you're roughly 40. You can measure it in lab animals and very specific tests or very specific like prospective human trials, but it's very expensive. And so it's not globally available. Be amazing to know, right? It would be amazing to actually have an AGE level. There is a great device, I think it's from the Netherlands. It's called an AGE reader, and you hook it up to your skin. It goes, and it tells you essentially what your AG levels in your skin are, right? The
Okay.
problem is that the accuracy is not great. I mean, I bought one, I've used it intermittently, and it's sort of like, depending on the day, it just fluctuates a huge amount. But if there was a blood test to tell you, like, yeah, your AGEs are doing well or they're terrible, that would be like an amazing indicator, right? So there are a bunch of things that I would guess within the next 5-10 years will be astounding. And then it's going to be a mishmash of all of these tests put together. I think right now we're making fantastic strides, but we don't have all the answers yet.
Okay. Interesting. Because essentially, and this is me asking you a question about what I'm doing here, which is I'm trying to create a unified score that gives people a better picture of how they're aging. Like, how would you advise me to make that score as accurate and as considered as possible?
It's a very good question. And I don't know the details of your scoring method. But I would take all of the numerical things that you can possibly get, right? So here's an example. Most people when you look at your cholesterol levels, they look at HDLs and LDLs and all the little fancy, like subcategories, but very few people look at oxidized LDLs. And I am fairly convinced that the absolute level of lipid is less important than the oxidized level, because an oxidized HDL or LDL is what gets recognized by a macrophage as foreign body, gets turned into a foam cell, and that's the beginning of atherosclerosis.
Right. And is that related to ApoB, or is that something totally different?
Completely different. ApoB can
Okay.
be oxidized. It's a matter of being very specific and figuring it out. Like, I think you're going in the right direction. Absolutely. I just think you're going to have a big wish list that says, what else can we do? Right.
Yeah.
And it'll grow over time. It absolutely
Yeah.
will. Right. And I guess I'm not huge into scoring, only because, again, I figure longevity is it's elective, right? People up until 5 years ago, 10 years ago, there was no longevity medicine. People would just eat well and exercise, and they felt pretty good, right? Or smoking doesn't make me feel very good, I'm not going to do that anymore. Fantastic. We are in a new era of proactive health, which is fantastic. And yes, we're going to measure it. We don't know everything yet, right? But I have found that when people come to me, they either want to dip their big toe into this little puddle of longevity. Like, I want to take 1 or 2 agents. I'm going to exercise a little bit more. Like, am I younger yet? This is what they do, right?
Yeah.
Or you get people that want to do everything humanly possible immediately.
Yeah.
Right. But what I don't know is how a scoring system would necessarily change their dynamic. But it might.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So this is where I'm almost going to come from the perspective of my target market. So my target market are very business orientated. So what I've done is I've tried to create a body as a business analogy. And what I've found, and happy to be challenged on this, is that the body runs in a similar way to a business, in that things need to happen at the right time in the right sequence so that it performs at the best possible level. So like, if staff turned up at the wrong time, if deliveries turned up at the wrong time, if loads of different things within your business was random, it wouldn't perform as well as it happening. And also with a business, you measure performance indicators, and those performance indicators drive a specific behavior. So because they measure that indicator, that means that they do the things that they need to do to drive that indicator in the right direction. The reason why I'm making a score out of it is because the score is made up of specific things that drive the right behavior. And as an example, if I want someone to go and run, exercise, improve their cardiovascular fitness, they need to improve their VO2 max. If someone's weak and they're not very strong, they need to improve their grip strength. And those particular indicators or KPIs will tell us whether they need to work on that particular behavior. And that's sort of why we're doing it. Like, as an example, we measure sleep consistency. We all know for your circadian rhythm, you need to get up and go to bed at the same time. So sleep consistency tells us whether they're doing that or not. So it's almost like, what KPI can we measure that drives the right behavior for longevity to help us live better now and live longer in the future? Does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. What's funny is you're mixing psychology in with longevity, right? That's what it is.
To a degree, yeah.
Right. I think that most people, especially driven people, right, and these are going to be your entrepreneurs, these people are pretty driven,
Yes.
right, and goal oriented, et cetera, they know what they're supposed to do. It's just a matter of how do you prod them to do it. And I guess my argument would be, is if you're going to do it, you're going to do it anyway. And if you're not,
it's like an accountability system. Like, I'm creating an accountability system to make them do the things that they need to do, right?
And I guess I sort of do the same thing. I'm just less into the measurement. I'm more into the guilt trip.
I love it.
So what I honestly do is, so I create longevity pyramids for people, right? Things you have to do every day, every week, every month, so on and so forth, right? So on the daily basis, it's going to be roughly the same as you, right? The 3 types of exercise, right? Cardiovascular, stuff for muscle. And I always, especially for women, I added some sort of jumping exercise. And the reason I do that is because impact activates osteoblastic cells, and that helps with bone density.
Osteoporosis in perimenopause and things like that, yeah?
Right. And even in, there are even some men floating around out there who are pretty osteoporotic because, they swim a lot, which is great, but it's not like impact on the bones. And they sit there and they do their muscle stuff, which is great. So I always think about the 3 categories. And so I pound people like, what have you done? What have you done? Right. So that's one. And then, of course, diet. And I don't push any particular diet with the exception of making it well-rounded. If you're a vegetarian, you're going to miss out on some things. If you're carnivore, you're going to miss out on some other things. So let's just make sure you get all your bases covered, right? And maybe don't eat the Twinkies and the Ho-Hos today. Fine.
In general, what I say to my clients is, I have this saying, which is, if you can't kill it or grow it, don't eat it. And but
that's cute.
It's a metaphor to say you've got to eat as close to the ground as you possibly can. And all successful diets, the one thing that they agree on is to eat whole foods. So that almost like the quality of your diet, and get your protein in. So I don't really, like you say, advise any particular diets, but yeah, I see what you're saying.
Okay, so then I think that some supplements are absolutely like rudimentary to longevity, right? And depending on people, when it's 1, 5, or 70, fine, right? I personally take 72, but that's neither here nor there. And then there are longevity medications, right? There are some drugs that just are extremely beneficial.
Is that like rapamycin and metformin?
So it's funny you say rapamycin. That is the one that I disagree with because...
Interesting. Okay.
Rapamycin, it's an mTOR inhibitor.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you look at laboratory animals, right, what's really interesting is they'll show you these animals that are on rapamycin. They're like, oh, their skin looks great. Oh, their hair looks all fluffy. Oh, they're running around. But if you measure their memories, they're terrible because mTOR is important for cells that turn over rapidly, right? This is the plasticity in your hippocampus for memory. This is your gut lining, and honestly, it's your red cells and a variety of other ones. So if you are on rapamycin, we know that there are inherent dangers. And because of this, they're trying to work out like, oh, you take 1 or 2 milligrams like every other week or something of that nature, because they're trying very hard to get the benefits without the risks. But we don't actually know what the appropriate dosing for rapamycin is. What we do know, however, is there will be rapologs, things that probably will be able to be differentiated in terms of which chemical pathways exactly that they are hitting, right? Additionally, anything that is an AMP kinase activator, by definition, is a mTOR inhibitor. Therefore, I think partial inhibition is reasonable. Complete inhibition is a really terrible idea.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense.
I love the fact you picked the only one that I don't take.
So your Kaufmann protocol, so it breaks down aging into specific cellular mechanisms, from what I understand. Why is that more accurate way to think about aging than like treating biological age as one single number?
So the question is, if you treat it as one number, it doesn't tell you what to do.
Sure. Okay. Interesting.
Right. So here's an example. Let's say you fail your SATs.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, you need to know where you failed, right?
You need to know where you failed. No, exactly. Yeah. Like, what do you mean? Reading? Is it comprehension? Is it vocabulary? Is it grammar? What is it, right? And so I started my professional career as a cell biologist. And oddly enough, I was a plant cell biologist, and I ran around in the tropics. But point being is I spent a lot of time staring at cells
Yeah.
and how did cells adapt to their changing light environments, nutrient environments? How did they do and whatever, right? So when I started thinking about longevity, there's a tiered system, right? In the Western medicine, we're designed to think about organs and systems. However, you can back that up to tissues, cultures, but I backed it all the way up to the cell because that's where I started my life, right? So if you look at a cell, and it's funny that you say a cell is a company, I think a cell is a factory.
Yeah,
right?
Interesting. Well, actually, I look at the body. The body's the company, and then everything else fits into it.
So I have this whole idea that like the cell is just a factory, and all it does is it monitors the environment, right? And it makes things. It could make sneakers, it could make Skittles, like whatever, but it makes things, right? Yeah. And depending on how things fail, there are going to be different outcomes, and things fail for very specific reasons, right? So this is where I'm going to bore you and your people to no end. But here is why you age. Tenet 1 is DNA failure. And this is the instruction manual for your factory. And this is essentially telomere length gets shorter every time a cell reproduces. Also, it gets glycated and oxidative stress, epigenetic mechanisms, and then heterochromatin redistribution, right? So those are the big DNA problems. Tenet 2 is mitochondria, and sort of fails for 7 or 8 reasons, depending on how you count them and organize them. Lowest hanging fruit in this category is obviously an NAD deficiency, because by the time you're 40, you are NAD deficient. If you have more chronic illness, it's going to happen a little earlier. If you exercise more, maybe it's a little bit later. But on average, by the time you're 40, you're deficient. And then there are a gazillion other reasons, right? Free radical formation, mitochondrial pore, lack of control, the actual like type of lipids, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, but I digress because I get all excited. Okay, that's 2. 3 is pathways. Right? These are going to be your assembly lines. And the big one, well, there's lots of big ones. So the biggest one I think in this category are your sirtuins. And you have 7 mammalian sirtuins, right? And these are histone deacetylases, and they live in different parts of your cell, and they're basically on-off switches. Right. Sirtuin 1 is the big one, lives in your nucleus, and it tells you like it organizes your circadian rhythms. It tells you where to store fat. It tells you if it's time to repair your DNA, like things like that. Very, very basic. And when sirtuin 1 fails, your cell loses homeostasis and you're sort of hosed. 3 is important because it's in your mitochondria, and that starts failing before all of the other ones. And 6 is super important because it helps your DNA repair mechanisms. But anyway, that's sirtuins. AMP kinase is a pathway. mTOR is a pathway. That's the rapamycin thing. And then I put circadian rhythms in there because what drives me absolutely bonkers is if you go to a longevity conference and there's a sleep expert, they tell you, oh, don't stare at computers, turn the lights off, or do this, do that, right? Go to bed at the same time. And that's fantastic advice. But as you get older, you're not sleeping because of biomolecular mechanisms. It takes 2 proteins to put you to sleep. It takes 2 to wake you up, right? And if you don't make these, you don't sleep. That's just what it is, right?
Okay, so question on that, because I want to try and clear something up to help me. Say I've got a client, right, and they are struggling with their sleep as an example. What you're saying is it might not be a behavioral thing. It could be a cellular thing. They're not producing the right SIRT1 in the right levels to be able to get to sleep. If they're not doing the right behaviors, should we fix that first before we go into trying to fix the SIRT1 as an example?
No.
So go to SIRT1 first.
So what's going to happen, right, is let you fix
or do it together.
Together is good. But if you fix behaviors and then nothing happens, there is no positive reinforcement that they should do that.
Okay.
Right? If you fix the cellular system and you still have crappy behaviors, I mean, it puts your metabolism back to when you were in your 20s. If you were in your 20s, you could have terrible behavior and you still sleep okay.
It's a good point. That's why hangovers get more difficult as you get older, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, for various reasons, but if you have an optimized cellular metabolism, you can abuse the crap out of yourself and get away with it.
That's
it just
a good point.
Doesn't work anymore as you get older because all the cellular pathways are broken. Okay. Anyway, so that's circadian rhythms. Let's see. Tenet 4 is what I call quality control. And this is the idea that our little cell here is a factory. And of course, factories break. The machinery can break. The widgets come out and they're not so great. So the same thing happens in a cell. So the machinery that makes things, the directions are your DNA.
Okay.
And it turns out that every day in every cell, you have up to 10 to the 5th DNA errors. That's a lot. right? So your body is constantly running around and fixing problems. And you have 5 DNA repair mechanisms that, number one, take a whole lot of organization. This is your crew that comes in every night and like checks the machinery and fixes it and plugs things back in and changes the spark plugs and whatever one does. But it takes a lot of energy that if when you don't have as you get older, you have more DNA damage, therefore you get more senescent cells and more cancer. And then there's the protein aspect. Like the proteins are our widgets of our factory. And we spend pretty much all of our time making proteins. We are little protein machines, right? Every cell can make up to 10,000 different proteins. Of course, they don't, right? Because of epigenetics, the kidney makes kidney proteins and the liver makes liver proteins. But you could, theoretically, right? There's a whole science of proteostasis, right? Of keeping your protein intact. One of my favorite things are chaperones. So every major protein that you make has a babysitter. It's a baby protein that just goes everywhere with it. It's a little nursemaid. From the moment that protein is born to the moment that protein is like gotten rid of, it is never alone. It is constantly being chaperoned. And it says, oh, stay away from that protein over there because you'll stick and it'll be bad. Or when a protein unfolds, it folds it back. Or if it has to pass through a membrane, right, it'll pass it off to a different chaperone. So these things, this is a lot of energy, right? But it's cool because they're heat shock proteins. A lot of these are. So this is what people, when they sit in the sauna, they like go, oh, I'm sweating out my toxins. Like, no, you're not. You're upregulating your heat shock proteins, right? So you're reducing relative protein failure while you're sitting there sweating, which that's kind of cool. Anyway, all right, so next category. Your immune system, this is 10 and 5. Your immune system fails over time and becomes your inflammasome. And we all know that with age, you become massively inflamed. So that's a huge problem. That's an easy one. Individual cell needs is next. And this is the idea that you need to eradicate your senescent cells, be super, super kind to your stem cells. And then knowing that a red cell is different than a kidney cell and then a brain cell. So everyone, little cells you need to make sure you cater to. And then lastly is waste management. And the big thing that I talk about in this category is glucose. Right. And I hate to blame glucose entirely because it's more like all reducing sugars. So it's fructose, it's ribose, all those sort of things.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But people don't. They like, oh, I shouldn't take ribose. Like, oh my God, people get told to take ribose all the time. Ribose is 500 times more glycosylating than glucose. So it's pretty crappy. But so glucose, obviously, it's sticky on the outside of you. It's sticky on the inside. It gets broken down into pieces. They form AGEs, advanced glycation end products. And these destroy pretty much anything that's long living in your cell, especially like collagen. So that's why skin droops, is why you get congestive heart failure without coronary disease, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, so soup to nuts, that's why you age. And if you don't address like all of those issues, your protocol just isn't going to work.
Interesting.
Voila.
Interesting. So, okay. So that moves that moves me on to, let's speak directly to my audience, which is for a founder in their 40s, 50s or 60s, and we can talk about men and women separately if needed. If they came to me and said, I don't feel like myself anymore, like they're feeling that drag, they're not sleeping as well, they don't have as much energy, everything's just slower than it used to be, you've got more pains than they had when they were younger. What in general, obviously everyone's individual, but what in general is usually happening to them at a cellular level?
All of those things. No, I'm
so
not
you
kidding.
Literally cover everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I do. And so what's interesting is, so for a normal, healthy, reasonably healthy person, like let's say 40, 45, right?
Yeah.
Generally speaking, most of the categories are all like biting the dust at roughly the same speed. Okay. If, however, you have specific symptoms, you can back those into cellular categories, right? The
Fine.
I'm tired thing is you're going to find that that's mitochondria.
Yeah, because that's the powerhouse. It's the energy, right?
That's right. Without energy, you're going to be tired. That's the easy one. I'm achy all the time. Well, that's your immune system that became your inflammasome. That's an easy one, right?
Okay.
And then if you look deeper into these people and they say, well, everyone in my family is diabetic or pre-diabetic, well, then waste management is going to be high, right? So what I do is you take a generic human and you go, okay, well, I think you should have these baseline items. And then you look at their specific complaints and then you add some things that help. And I usually end up starting, beginners with just over-the-counter stuff because it freaks them out a little bit less. And then ultimately they graduate to like pharmaceuticals, understanding that like it doesn't matter where it's coming from. I honestly don't care if a molecule came from a plant or a factory. It's just a molecule. And actually, if it comes from a factory, like it comes with quality assurance. If it came from a plant, you never really know, right? But anyway, you start someone with a reasonably basic program that covers all of the tenants, and then you adjust it accordingly depending on who they are.
Okay. So another question then. I've got someone that comes to me and says, I'm struggling with my sleep and my energy. Just from what you've just said, that sounds like mitochondria 31, correct? So
Yeah.
if it was over the counter stuff, so they're not being adventurous, what would you say I could default to almost say, try this stuff that you can get over the counter anyways?
Someone asked me this like a decade ago. And I came up with this combination of things where it pretty much hits every tenant in a very sort of simplistic way.
Okay.
And it's called the panacea. And it's not really a panacea, but the letters work out that way. So it's kind of cool. So the P, well, it's just, you know what it is like when you like play with stuff. Anyway,
Yeah.
the P
I
stands
love it.
pterodilbane, right? And so that's a sirtuin-1 activator. Choices in this category usually pterodilbane or resveratrol. I think pterodilbane's better. It has more bioavailability, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so sirtuin activation is crucial for all cellular homeostasis. So we start with that.
Interesting.
PA is astaxanthin. We have so many free radicals in our bodies. It's ungodly, right? Yeah. And everyone drinks their cute little like antioxidant drink.
Antioxidants, yeah.
Being in the, I mean, that's just useless, honestly. I mean, it's cute,
I know.
it's adorable.
I've just realized that.
It doesn't do a goddamn thing. But astaxanthin is amazing. Astaxanthin is a molecule. It comes from algae. And when algae is, I like to say pissed off, or my kids say when angry, it's angry algae produced.
Okay.
But in reality, it's physiologically challenged algae. So salinity, temperature, whatever. It produces this molecule. You put it together and it's like a goo. It's this orangish, pinkish goo. And it saves the actual algae from all sorts of stresses, right?
Okay.
And if we consume this, it saves us from all of these stresses. And of note, like if you look at anything in the marine system that's pink or orange, it's astaxanthin. So like salmon, sockeye salmon have amazing amounts of astaxanthin in it. So that's sort of cool. The other thing to note, if you go to the grocery store and it says color enhanced, that's astaxanthin. So that's actually okay.
Oh, interesting.
Right? So I always go, yes, color enhanced. But anyway, so astaxanthin, number one, if when you take it, your skin doesn't burn because you're protecting yourself from DNA or from DNA damage from UV radiation.
Wow. So it eliminates as much of a need for sunscreen, right?
Yeah, it does.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
It goes to your retina. And the retina is interesting, right? Because your retina actually gets more radiation than anything else because sun comes in, it gets focused by your lens, zaps it onto your retina, and voila, like that's significant antioxidant or UV radiation needing an antioxidant, right? Mm-hmm. So that's huge. And the other really cool thing about astaxanthin is it travels in your HDLs and LDLs because it's lipid soluble, blocking the oxidation of those molecules. So you, in effect, just reduce the relative risk of coronary disease. So that's cool. Anyway, so that's astaxanthin. Where are we? PAN. N is some sort of NAD precursor, right?
Like NMN?
Right. Any of those things. Comes in a patch, a nasal spray, an injection. Don't get the IV drip because it's too much too quickly and it's kind of toxic at those doses, whatever. So you want small doses on a daily basis. Curcumin is huge. That's PAN, so it's 2 C's. Curcumin has to be bioavailable. It's one of the strongest natural anti-inflammatories that we have. It also does a whole lot of other cool things because it's polyphenol. So that's extremely useful. And carnosine, which is a natural dipeptide, men have more than women. We all lose it as we get older. Protects your muscles because it absorbs acid as you're exercising so you don't hurt as much. And it's transglycosylating agent. So you can actually lift some glucose off of your tissues as you like have all of these AGEs floating around. Anyway, so that unto itself is top 5, right? So I always start with that.
Okay.
But then your example was exhaustion, which is mitochondrial failure. Now we know that astaxanthin is going to help mitochondria. We know because it helps with the biogenesis of mitochondria. Mm-hmm. We know that NAD is going to help. But the other cool thing that I will throw in is a sirtuin-3 activator because that controls, it's sort of like the mastermind of your mitochondria. So SIRT3, and it starts dropping by the time you're 35. So dihydromericitin is sort of, I think, king in this category. And what's really cool is if you look up dihydromericitin, it tells you that it's a cure for hangovers. Okay. And the reason it's a cure for hangovers is when you drink alcohol, you're kind of like abusing the mitochondria in your liver. Mm-hmm. Right. So if we upregulate them, not only do you recover from a hangover faster because you're like processing the toxins more, right? But if you take it all the time, you're upregulating your mitochondria all the time. And then you have more energy. Anyway, so there you
Excellent.
go. Those are my generic baseline
Like
recommendations.
over the counter stuff that anyone can get.
All over the counter.
So that's sleep and energy. When I talk about stress with
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
people,
whoa. That's actually not sleep. Oh, no, 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 no.
oh, what's
No, no.
sleep then? Let's talk about that.
Sleep requires at the base, the top of sleep is sirtuin 6.
Okay.
And that gets activated by fucodan, which comes from seaweed, mostly from Japan. That activates SIRT6. And again, you need the NAD to make that happen. So that's good, right? And then you need selenium. Most people are selenium deficient, and that helps with circadian rhythms. And if those things don't help you, then there's something called nobilitin that activates a pathway called ROR alpha, and it increases the vacillation of your circadian rhythms. So you sleep better. That's sleep.
Interesting. So the things that I've looked at with sleep are like cortisol suppressors and magnesium and things like that. So would you take those alongside that stuff, or would you just swap it out?
So it depends what your goal is. So my patients are on magnesium, but specifically magnesium threonate.
Yeah, I do threonate and biglycinate.
Yeah, so threonate is the only one that goes through the blood-brain barrier. And
yes.
I really like it. It increases hippocampal plasticity, so it's good for memory. And yes, it does make you a little bit sleepy. Does it keep you asleep? No, but it helps put you to sleep. Right?
Okay.
And the cortisol thing is interesting because you're treating the problem. I mean, you're treating like the downstream problem, but not the actual problem, right? So if it helps people, fantastic. But it's not like, it's like treating the nausea and vomiting from chemotherapy, but not actually like making your life better. You know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah.
Anyway, so there's levels of treatment. So anyway, it does fit into the scheme. It's just going to be different for everybody.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. So for things like stress, I usually talk to people about nasal breathing, NSDR, having breaks, all that sort of stuff. Can stress be managed with like supplements and your types of protocols that you're doing?
Oh, yes. Here, you're going to love this one. When people bring up the old stress word, I usually put them on low-dose lithium.
Lithium? Like from batteries?
Well, I don't recommend eating batteries, but yes, lithium. And so lithium is super cool because it turns out that if you end up having higher lithium in foods that you eat or drinking water, there's an all-cause reduced morbidity and mortality to that population.
Wow. Okay.
Right? People are lithium deficient, right?
Interesting.
It helps mitochondria work better. It helps telomeres. It helps, there's so many things that lithium does. The key, however, is you don't want to be lithium toxic, right? So obviously it's a treatment for neurologic disease. So if you are bipolar or major depression or something of that nature, the starting treatment dose is 300 milligrams. And people end up usually bouncing to 600, 900, 1200. And at the higher doses, there are clearly side effects, right? Mm-hmm. So I usually tell people to start with 75 milligrams. So it's a quarter of an actual treatment dose. And I will tell you that anxiety goes down and it's good for your cellular function. So like it's a win-win.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So
here's another cool thing. The other neat thing about stress, right? Is stress. You can be allergic to stress. Why? Because cortical releasing hormone has receptors on mast cells. Mast cells are part of your immune system and they degranulate when there's receptors get activated. There's probably, I don't know, 10, 12 different type of receptors. There's estrogen receptors and IgE receptors, all sorts of receptors. But there are in fact cortical releasing hormone receptors on these things. So when you are stressed, it causes the mast cell to like degranulate and you get histamine and you get serotonin and you get proteases and you get all these nasty things that then we associate with physiologic stress. So you can actually stabilize your mast cells, thus decreasing the effect of stress.
It makes sense when you explain it. And what I try and do is I try and take all this information and really simplify it for the people that I'm working with so that they really understand they do this happens, and they want to see that result at the end of the day. And I do that through behaviors currently and some supplements, but it's really nice to know these extra things that we could probably layer in to help people as they get into their 40s and 50s. So the one thing I want to cover off, especially in this session, is the main thing that a lot of, especially men, but women as well, women are more on the fat loss side than the strength side, but both men and women in their 40s and 50s want to improve their strength and reduce fat. Where would you, apart from the actual training itself, where would you start from a cellular level?
At the very baseline, men and women use different energy sources. Women use lipids and men use glucose as their primary cellular fuel. Okay.
Yeah.
And this changes how you sort of look at things. So what's interesting is, so as women get older, because it's driven by estrogen. So when women get older and they lose estrogen, if they're not repleting it, the body is completely catawonkus because it doesn't know really how to use glucose well. And all of a sudden you've got all these lipids that are floating around and you don't know what to do with them because your body's not using them anymore. And you just sort of store them away and you get fat, right? In addition to sirtuin failure, which tells you like you're storing fat differently now. So there's a whole giant failure of system, right? So to start with, you've got to make your cells optimal. It goes back to the primary thing, right? You got to optimize your NAD, optimize your sirtuins, whatever.
Yeah.
After that, we know that just every cell doesn't work as well. So we want to increase output by increasing like what we're doing. So men and weightlifters know this, right? If you bulk up on, or if you take a lot of amino acids, you're going to make more muscle.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic, right? You can also use your solic acid, helps make more muscle. Alpha ketoglutarate helps you make more muscle. There's all sorts of things you can do to increase muscle load. And if those things fail, then you go to like peptides. So, once upon a time it was like tesamorelin, ipimorelin. Now I think we're on to sesmorelin. That's what I'm currently injecting just for fun. So that's building muscle. And then burning fats. There's all sorts of things that you can take to sort of increase your utilization. So if you take estrogen as a woman, as an example, right, you're going to keep using the fat, the lipids as a main usage in your mitochondria. So you're not going to have as much of a problem, right? So all you need to do essentially is keep your metabolism or your cellular function the same as when you're in your 30s, through your 40s and your 50s, and you won't get fat.
Okay. How would you go about that?
Cellular optimization.
Okay.
So
what you're saying is, from a muscle building and fat perspective, that's more of getting everything in line, so that everything ties in together and it will result in you having less fat and more muscle.
Yeah, absolutely. Because people can do it like au naturel, right? It's just extremely hard to do. I mean, if you were an Olympic athlete and you continue to be an Olympic athlete, like you're not going to, things are better. But if you've been like sort of a pseudo exerciser and you hit your 40s and you're still a pseudo exerciser, you're going to go downhill very quickly. And it's extremely hard to get back up that hill without help. So I'm all for bioengineered help.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, so you've talked a lot about the cellular side. I'm more on the behavioral side, but you've talked about behaviors as well and how you almost like guilt trip people into doing the right behaviors, which is great. Essentially, if you just picture you've got a client, how do you start with both behavior and fixing their cells? Essentially, how do you combine the two?
That's a good question. I think it sort of depends on who they are to start with.
Okay.
Right. I always start, if you walked into a doctor's office and your primary care physician, you start at the very basics, right? Who are you? What do you eat? How do you exercise? What are your health concerns? What did your parents die of? How's the health of your siblings? So I'm trying to figure out culture versus genetics, environment, habits, right? And the other thing you say to someone is like, well, how far down this road do you want to go, right? Some people are really like, they just want like the easy way out. They just want to take some drugs. Other people are like, well, I prefer to do this and not that. So it's a sociology experiment in essence, right? I think that your population is going to be a little bit different because they're intrinsically driven to start with.
They're going to be like, what do I need to take and do to be at the top of my game?
And I'm just going to throw this in there. So because your population is already like there, they're going to be like, sign me up. Biologics are crucial, right? So on top of your supplements and your drugs and your diet and your this and that and the other, most of my like people that are in this to win, and I've got generals and I've got Olympic athletes, we got everybody, or ex-Olympic athletes because now they're a little bit older. We all get together and inject exosomes because exosomes are like the end all be all of biologics. There's like so little risk, amazing reward. They're hard to get, but once you get used to having them, like you just feel like you are like on fire. Like you're just, it is amazing what your mental and physical capacity does. It's crazy.
I've had a lot of people come to me and talk and ask me about peptides, hormone replacement therapy. Exosomes has never come up. I actually have looked a little bit into exosomes, but it really has sparked my interest after speaking to you. What would you say the core differences are between things like that, exosomes, peptides, and hormone replacement therapy like TRT?
Very different levels. So when it comes to hormone replacement, I think of hormones as there's just more proteins that your either body's making or not making, right? And we know over time standard patterns, right? What's interesting is if you fix someone's cells, you can frequently boost those levels up to something that's normal. I took a guy's testosterone, it was in the 200s up to the 600s just by optimizing his cells.
Yeah.
Great. Right? Because the problem is once you start on these things, there's no going back. You screw your feedback loop. So if your body goes, oh, I have enough testosterone because I'm injecting it, then you don't actually make it yourself, right?
Stops your natural production, right?
Exactly. So if you can boost it, fantastic. If you can't, yes, you supplement. That goes for women and men. And I think some people are a little overzealous. I'm working on an estrogen algorithm right now to make sure people take exactly what they need depending on who they are and not following these like generic sort of recommendations. But so those are just proteins that you need. You either make them yourself or you take it exogenously. So that's step one. Peptides are amazingly interesting. All peptides do is spot check, or I call it spot welding, essentially, right?
Okay.
So let's say you're pretty much optimized, but I want a little bit more muscle. Zoop, right? Say I'm doing really well, but my immune system, boop. Want a little bolus for my skin. Boop, right? All good, fine, right? But you can't take them all the time, and they're very, very limited. And they work by sending a message to your nucleus that says, make a particular protein. And if your cell's not working very well, they may not work, right? So peptides don't work as well, right? So I always say you can send the directions to make a Skittle into the shoe factory, but they're going to go like, yeah, like we're not doing that, right? And so you can yell at those people all day long. You can't do it. But if your factory can make something, then you're fine, right? So those are peptides. Exosomes are like the end all be all of like the icing on the cake, because you're essentially now feeding 200 to 250 growth factors, cytokinins, microRNAs, blah, 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 into a cell directly, causing it to regenerate and rejuvenate. And it's miraculous. So they are in a class all by themselves. And I think of it as like, it's 3-layer up. It's something you do every month to quarterly. I can tell you, people fly in from all over the globe to Vegas to come to Club Exosome because it's just so helpful.
If I was to indicate to my clients sort of what doing exosome treatment is, because I was on the road of, I didn't want to do, for me personally, I didn't want to do hormone replacement therapy because I knew it suppressed my natural production. So I was looking down more the natural, supplemental, that sort of route to get my hormones to the level that I wanted them at. Then I thought, okay, peptides, like you say, amino acid profile that you inject in, and they boost certain areas that you want boosted. And there's little side effects to doing peptides as long as you get them from a reputable source. So that's what got me thinking of that. But then I've heard of exosomes, and literally just after I found out about exosomes, you then came on, we had a conversation about it, and it's just got me ticking about exosomes. Like, if you treated me as like a little bit of a typical client that I would normally have, what sort of does exosomes cost, and what route would you suggest we take to start doing them?
Good question. So it depends on what your concerns are. So some people take them just for general longevity, and some people take them because a certain part of their body isn't working. I get a lot of, my shoulder hurts, my knee hurts, my this hurts. So I've injected everything from scalps to make hair grow back, faces to make you look, prettier, arthritic fingers. I think I've put exosomes in every possible body part. And yes, I have put it into men's private parts. So you can target tissues that you want, like specifically like to regenerate and repair, right? Or you just put it in an IV and it goes everywhere. So it depends on what you're looking to do. What usually happens is people come in, they're like, oh, and then they pick a body part and they like that, but then they like so amazed at everything else that it does, they turn into people that just get it all the time anyway.
Okay. So I want to perform at the highest possible level, and I want to look my absolute best. What would you suggest if they were my goals rather than a specific injury?
So I would say IV exosomes. And then we start, I dole it out by what I call an aliquot. And an aliquot is going to be different from company to company, but it's basically what is the minimum amount that we see a clinical difference for. Mm-hmm. And when you look at exosome companies, I mean, they're just, the numbers are like all over the place. 50 billion, 250 billion, a trillion, and you really can't measure them exactly quite like that. So every time we use a different company, we have a group of us that test them and we think, aha, this many for this company is one aliquot. So for a grown adult, usually one or two aliquots, either monthly or quarterly, is going to make you feel amazing. And the more you do it, like the higher you feel, and just the escalation of how you feel, it's synergistic. It just gets better, 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 better.
Okay. What does doing exosome treatment typically cost?
So at least at Club Exosome, I want to say, I think one aliquot is between 900 to 1,000, and then two is like 1,500 to 1,600, something like that.
Okay, so not thousands and thousands to have one treatment. No. You suggest doing that quarterly, monthly, if you're doing an IV?
Yeah, there's it's an argument or question to do less all the time or more intermittently. So we ended up, Club Exosome is in Vegas quarterly. So people tend to do a little bit more. If they come to my clinic, I have a clinic in Miami and a clinic in Vegas. And if they come to me on a more regular basis, then we do a little bit less, just more consistently. Cool.
So I've got a couple questions just to wrap us up. These may be quick fire. They may lead us into a whole nother conversation. We've sort of touched on a little bit of this, but where do you think people waste the most money on longevity because they're guessing rather than actually doing the right thing?
I think that people watch useless TikTok and YouTube videos. And somebody that looks young and attractive says, you have to take this. And they really don't understand what this is. But they go, advertising is great. I'm going to take that. It's expensive. It's probably unnecessary. I mean, it might be good, but it might not be good, right? So understanding what you are taking and understanding the science and the cost, I think is extremely important.
Okay. And back to my point around behaviors, we mentioned in previous call that we had together that you believe it should be done together. I got a little bit of a different indication before that you think you should look at the cells first and then the behavior. Which way would you approach it if you were me?
So I think it depends on what pathology you're looking at, right?
Okay.
For example, like I'm going to go to sleep and I can't sleep is frustrating. So I think that maybe you stagger it by 2 weeks. Like once you're on supplements for 2 to 3 weeks, like things are just so much easier. On the other hand, going to the gym is behavioral. That's a habit, and it takes a while to develop a habit. So if you want to get someone into a physical routine, do it immediately, right? Get them understanding that like pattern. And then like a month in, you go, now we're going to add some stuff that's going to like even make that better.
Yes, that's the sort of process that I go through.
So I think it just depends on who the person is and which attributes of longevity you're actually looking at. But I mean, there's no doubt that you need both strategies. It's just, it's a matter of like, how do you sort of get them going? And I would say baseline, get people on a standard protocol, right? No one wants to get up to go to the gym if you're sirtuin deficient and you have no energy, So a little bit here and then augment the exercise and maybe a little bit more and then augment the whatever. Like, so maybe a vacillatory revving up cycles is the way to go.
Yeah. So I sort of, when I am on board clients, I have a bit of a questionnaire for them that tells me what are their behaviors and what are they doing around sort of supplement and recovery protocols. So I've got a good idea of what they do. Essentially, the process that I go through is I fix the big behaviors first. So the big things that they're getting wrong, and they fix those first. And then if that doesn't fix whatever it is they've come in to fix, then we look at their supplement protocol a little bit further down the line. But if they've genuinely got a good routine, good behaviors in place, they might be taking supplements already and they've got these problems, then I skip and I go directly into the supplement side of things, because that's probably going to be the biggest fix, because most of their core behaviors are correct. They're going to the gym, they're eating whole foods, they're sleeping at regular times, they're doing that general stuff that they should be doing, and they're still having these problems. Like I've got a guy that just can't fix his sleep, and I actually are going to take a few things that we've mentioned on this call, go and see if I can help him with that, because he's got all of his behaviors right and it's just not working. So yeah, you've made some really, really good points. And I want to sort of finish off with a little bit of a closing question, because it's really specific to what I want to achieve. And I know that we talked about there really isn't one way of measuring like how old you are from a biological perspective, but I'm doing that. I'm measuring people people's biological age through a number of different metrics, and I'm trying to bring in as much as I can that we know already to make it as accurate as possible. And I guess if someone listening to this wants to be a decade younger, they're 40 or 50 and they want to be 10 years younger than they actually are, what is the first cellular system that they should look at?
I don't know. That's like asking me to pick my favorite child. That's not a fair question.
Okay. So based on our conversation then, from what I'm seeing reflecting on this conversation is you hit everything at once so that you know that everything's covered, right?
I do.
So all the systems that you spoke about at the beginning when you were going through your protocol and the different tenets of longevity, what you do is you listen to the client, but you cover everything to make sure that you haven't missed anything so that you know that they're covered from a cellular perspective, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And the other interesting thing, I want to reflect a little bit on your I want to lose 10 years business, is the idea that you're going to wake up tomorrow and look and feel 10 years younger is preposterous.
Okay.
But I like to think of it as from like maybe one birthday to the next birthday, when you would normally have aged a year, I think you will have only aged 9 to 10 months.
Yeah. So
right?
basically, you're changing your pace of aging, right?
Yes, exactly right. You're not going backwards. You're just not going forwards as quickly, right? So if you want to lose 10 years and you start when you're 40, it's going to take you a while. But by the time you are 55, you will look 7 years younger.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Because the thing that I focus on is functional things that can change quite quickly, like your VO2 max and your strength. But from a cellular perspective and how old you are at your cells, you basically what you're doing is through your behaviors, your supplements and your protocols, you're changing your pace of aging to, let's say, 14 months a year to 8 or 9 months a year, right? So it's going to take you longer to get to that 10 years from a cellular level, but you might be functioning at a much better level at the age that you're at, right?
Yes, without a doubt. Yes, well said.
Okay. Cool. I just wanted to get that picture in my head, and you've made it very clear for me, and it's really interesting. It's nice to meet someone that knows the detail but can also explain it in a really simple way as well. So thank you for covering that. Last question, just to sort of wrap up. This is a bit of a standard question. If people want to get in contact with you, how would they do that?
So I have actually 2 websites. If people are curious about the science, the tenets and the supplements and all that kind of thing, and my links to my books, whatever, it's going to be Kaufmann Protocol.com.
Okay.
And if someone actually wants to come find me, either in a clinic or online or whatever, it's KaufmannLongevity.com.
Just to cover that off then, what books have you written? Are they available on Amazon for people to buy?
Of course they are. There's 2 hardcore books, not hardcore, hardcover, I guess. No, soft cover, but like actually paper form. One is called Why We Age and How to Stop It. And it goes through the 7 tenets and it goes through my rating system. And at the time, like the top 15 or so things to take. And a lot of those are still very, very key. The second book is called Aging Solutions, and it's the next 28 agents. And it reviews why those are important and updates in terms of more cellular information. And then recently I decided that it takes so long to actually write a book, because by the time, it took me 4 years to do the first one, right? By the time you get to the end, then like the information in chapter 1 is maybe out of date.
Right.
So I decided, right? It's just like, chasing my tail. So I decided to release what I call an e-treaty. So these are chapters, pretty damn long chapters, but they're chapters on isolated subjects that ultimately will be put into a book. People just were bugging me. They didn't want to wait that long for the information. So there's one called Mastering the Mast Cell. And it's all about what they do, where they are, how they get worse with age, what you can do to treat it, et cetera, et cetera. So all 3 things are on Amazon.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you very much. All of that stuff will be in the description anyways. We'll put your links in there as well, so that anyone that wants to contact you for whatever reason has got the access to be able to do that. So Sandra, thank you for joining me today. And what I appreciate about this conversation is that it brings aging back to where it actually happens, which is in the cell. Like energy is cellular, sleep is cellular, how we recover is cellular, and how we adapt in the future and all that sort of stuff is cellular. And even consistency depends on whether the system has enough capacity to execute on a regular basis. And that matters because our mission is not just about longevity, it's to reclaim as much life as we possibly can right now, so that not only we have better lives now, but we can extend that for as long as possible, like your point around health span. But what we have to do is we have to measure this as accurately as possible. And I know you mentioned about, the way that you do it. And I'm trying to do it from a business owner's perspective where they can see a number and go after that number. And that's the way I'm looking at it. But I want to make sure it's grounded in the right science. And some of the points that you've made on here have been really, really good and made me think about what I'm going to do in the future. And that's why, to me, the BioAge index matters, because we need to understand where someone is now, where they're potentially heading, which systems are creating a drag on their body, and how many years they can actually reclaim, and how they can feel better now. So it's essentially, it's not guessed. And we measure it as accurately as the science allows. And like you said before, things are going to change. And you write books, and the first chapter, once you get to the end of the book, is out of date, right? So we're going to focus on more years reclaimed, greater accuracy, better decisions, better lives by doing the right things in the right order at the right time. And that's how essentially we live better longer. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much for coming on this show. And it won't be the last time you hear from me, because I'm certainly going to look you up for the exosomes thing. And anyone that wants to know anything about Sandra and what she does, the links will be in the bio. And of course, come and see me on the next episode, and I'll speak to you all soon. Thank you very much.